While you're spending hundreds of dollars every year on chemical weed killers that barely work for 3 weeks, medieval gardeners had access to 20 specific plants that were literally 5 times more effective at eliminating weeds permanently. These weren't some mystical herbs or rare exotic species. We're talking about common plants like tansy, rue, wormwood, pennyroyal, and costmary that could completely clear a garden plot in just 2 weeks without any synthetic chemicals whatsoever. Your great-great-grandmother probably knew their names by heart, but somehow this knowledge just vanished from modern gardening. Think about that for a second. Plants that worked better than anything we have today, plants that cost nothing to grow, plants that actually improved soil health while killing weeds. But here's the thing that's going to blow your mind. The same companies selling you expensive herbicides today are the exact same corporations that made sure this ancient knowledge disappeared from gardening books and university courses. It's not a coincidence that the most effective natural weed control methods got erased right when chemical companies needed to create a market for their products. And it's exactly why they made sure to hide this information from you. Let me put this in perspective with numbers that'll make your head spin. A single tansy plant, which costs maybe 50 cents to grow from seed, can naturally suppress weeds in a 10-foot radius for an entire growing season. That's the equivalent of about 200 square feet of weed protection from one tiny plant that grows itself year after year. Compare that to glyphosate-based weed killers that cost $40 per gallon and need to be reapplied every month just to keep weeds at bay temporarily. The medieval gardeners weren't just using 1 or 2 plants either. They had systematic companion planting schemes using combinations of rue planted alongside beans, wormwood scattered through grain fields, and pennyroyal borders around vegetable patches. These plants didn't just kill existing weeds. They actually changed the soil chemistry to prevent new weeds from germinating in the first place, something no modern herbicide has ever been able to accomplish. And while your neighbors are spending their weekends spraying chemicals that might give them cancer, these medieval plants were actually attracting beneficial insects and improving the overall health of the garden ecosystem. But the chemical companies couldn't patent a plant that grows itself, so they made sure you'd never learn about costmary, a plant that could eliminate dandelions so effectively that medieval texts called it the earth's own cleaner. Here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something they definitely don't want you to know. These 20 medieval plants didn't work through some gentle natural process that takes months to show results. Plants like black mustard and wild garlic release natural compounds called allelopathic chemicals that are literally toxic to weed seeds and roots but completely harmless to crops and beneficial plants. We're talking about biological warfare at the plant level, and it's more targeted and effective than anything scientists have created in a laboratory. The medieval gardeners figured out through generations of trial and error exactly which plants to combine for maximum weed suppression. They discovered that planting feverfew near roses didn't just keep weeds away, it also repelled harmful insects and improved the health of the rose bushes themselves. Same thing with lavender planted around herb gardens, or chamomile scattered through cabbage patches. These weren't random choices or folklore superstitions. These were carefully developed agricultural techniques based on real results that worked consistently for hundreds of years. And here's the kicker. Modern soil science has now proven that these medieval gardeners were absolutely right about how these plants work. The chemical compounds they release into the soil are more sophisticated and targeted than synthetic herbicides, but somehow this scientifically verified information never makes it into mainstream gardening advice. What's really going to shock you is how simple and obvious these methods were before the chemical industry convinced everyone that gardening had to be complicated and expensive. Take yarrow for example. Medieval gardeners knew that a handful of yarrow leaves chopped up and scattered around tomato plants would prevent virtually any weed from sprouting nearby while actually improving the flavor of the tomatoes themselves. Or consider catnip, which they planted in strategic spots throughout their gardens because it releases a natural herbicide that specifically targets grass-type weeds without affecting broadleaf vegetables or flowers. These plants were so effective that medieval agricultural manuals devoted entire chapters to proper placement and timing for maximum weed control. The knowledge was so common that children learned these companion planting techniques alongside basic reading and arithmetic. But somehow between 1950 and 1980, this information just disappeared from gardening education, university agriculture programs, and popular gardening books. It wasn't gradual either. It was systematic and deliberate, happening right when chemical companies were investing billions in creating synthetic herbicide markets. The timing isn't an accident, and the fact that this traditional knowledge got erased so completely right when corporations needed to sell expensive alternatives should tell you everything you need to know about who benefits from keeping you in the dark. And here's what's going to make you angry when you realize how long you've been paying for solutions to a problem that was already solved centuries ago. The medieval gardeners didn't just use these plants randomly or hope for the best. They had specific techniques like intercropping tansy with beans to prevent bindweed, or creating border plantings of rue and wormwood to establish weed-free zones around their most valuable crops. These weren't primitive farming methods. These were sophisticated agricultural systems that worked so well that some medieval gardens could feed entire families without a single weed problem for decades at a time. The plants essentially created their own maintenance-free ecosystem where beneficial growth was encouraged and harmful weeds were naturally eliminated without any human intervention needed. But the chemical companies couldn't make money from plants that propagate themselves and work for free year after year. So they systematically removed this knowledge from agricultural education and replaced it with dependency on products that have to be purchased over and over again. And it's exactly why they made sure to hide this information from you. But what if I told you that you're about to discover not just what these plants are, but exactly how medieval gardeners used them to create virtually weed-free gardens that practically maintain themselves? Imagine two farmers standing in the same field looking at the exact same weed problem but seeing completely different solutions. The American farmer sees dollar signs, thinking about which expensive herbicide to buy next, while the European farmer who learned from his grandfather sees free plants that have been solving this problem for 1,000 years. This isn't just about different farming styles. This is about how entire cultures developed opposite relationships with nature itself. In medieval Europe, every village had someone who knew exactly which plants to grow for natural weed control, and this knowledge was passed down through families like precious heirlooms. But when industrial agriculture took over in America, we skipped right past this traditional wisdom and jumped straight into chemical dependency. The result is that European gardeners today still commonly use plants like lady's bedstraw and ground elder for weed suppression, while American gardeners have never even heard these names. It's the same earth, the same weeds, the same growing conditions, but completely different approaches to solving the problem. And the crazy part is that the European approach works better, costs nothing, and actually improves the land instead of poisoning it. While we're buying products that create more problems, they're using solutions that create more solutions. Let me tell you about Maria Santos, a grandmother from Portugal who moved to California 20 years ago and couldn't understand why her American neighbors were spending so much money fighting weeds. Back in her village, every family garden had borders of southernwood and santolina that kept weeds away naturally without anyone thinking twice about it. When Maria planted the same traditional setup in her new California garden, using seeds she brought from home, something amazing happened. Within 2 seasons, her garden was completely weed-free while her neighbors were still battling the same dandelions and crabgrass they'd been fighting for years. Word spread through the neighborhood, and soon people were asking Maria what her secret was. But when she tried to explain about medieval companion planting using herbs like hyssop and winter savory, most people looked at her like she was talking about magic spells instead of basic gardening. The disconnect was so complete that even when people could see the results with their own eyes, they still couldn't believe that something so simple and free could work better than the products they'd been buying. Maria's story isn't unique either. Immigrants from Mediterranean countries often bring this traditional knowledge with them, but it gets lost within a generation because American gardening culture is built around buying solutions instead of growing them. Here's where different cultures reveal just how backwards our thinking has become about weed control. In traditional Chinese agriculture, farmers use a combination of allelopathic plants like chrysanthemum and artemisia species that have been preventing weeds for over 3,000 years. These aren't exotic plants that only grow in special conditions. We're talking about common herbs that grow easily in any climate but create natural herbicide zones around crops through their root systems. Japanese farmers developed similar techniques using plants like shiso and mizuna that serve double duty as both food crops and natural weed suppressants. Even today, you can visit traditional farms in these countries and see vast fields that are virtually weed-free without a drop of chemical herbicide ever being used. The farmers don't consider this special knowledge or ancient wisdom. To them, it's just normal farming, like knowing to water plants when they're dry. But somehow in Western agriculture, we convinced ourselves that fighting nature with chemicals was more advanced than working with nature's own systems. The result is that we're the only culture in human history that spends more money on weed control than we make from our gardens. Every other traditional farming culture figured out how to make weeds eliminate themselves using plants that cost nothing and improve everything. It's like we took a detour into expensive complexity when the simple effective path was right there the whole time. The most shocking cultural difference is how medieval European monasteries approached weed management compared to how we approach it today. Monastery gardens fed entire communities year-round and were famous for being completely weed-free, but they achieved this using systematic plantings of herbs like horehound, betterny, and meadowsweet that created overlapping zones of natural weed suppression. The monks didn't see weed control as a separate problem to solve. They integrated it into their overall garden design so that every plant served multiple purposes, including keeping unwanted growth away. These monastery gardens were so successful that they became models for agricultural development throughout medieval Europe. The monks kept detailed records of which plant combinations worked best in different soil conditions and climates, creating what was essentially the world's first scientific database of natural weed control methods. But here's what's really mind-blowing about their approach. The monks designed their gardens so that the weed-suppressing plants were often more valuable than the crops they were protecting. Herbs like rosemary and lavender that prevented weeds also provided medicine, perfume ingredients, and preserved food, making the gardens profitable in multiple ways simultaneously. Compare that to modern weed control, where we spend money on products that only solve one problem temporarily and create new problems we have to spend more money to fix. The monastery approach was elegant, sustainable, and economically brilliant, but it required understanding plants instead of just buying products. What's really going to blow your mind is how completely we've reversed the natural relationship between plants and soil health when it comes to weed management. Traditional cultures understood that certain plants like comfrey and nettle don't just prevent weeds from growing nearby, they actually improve soil conditions in ways that make future weed problems less likely. These plants bring deep nutrients to the surface, create beneficial fungal networks, and establish soil chemistry that favors useful plants over troublesome ones. It's like having a living system that gets better at solving the problem the longer it works, instead of getting less effective over time like chemical treatments do. Medieval gardeners specifically chose combinations of plants that would create this kind of self-improving system where each year the garden became more weed-resistant and more productive simultaneously. They understood that fighting weeds was thinking small, but preventing the conditions that allow weeds to thrive in the first place was thinking big. Modern agriculture does exactly the opposite, creating soil conditions that require constant intervention and expense to maintain. We've literally built our entire gardening culture around making the problem worse, so we have to keep buying solutions. But traditional cultures built their systems around making the problem solve itself so they could focus on enjoying the abundance instead of fighting endless battles. And that's exactly why understanding these cultural differences is the key to breaking free from expensive weed control dependency and creating gardens that work with you instead of against you. Using these medieval plants is like having a supermarket, pharmacy, and lawn care service all growing in your backyard for free while you sleep. Take tansy for example, which not only eliminates weeds in a 10-foot radius but also repels ants, mice, and flying insects while providing natural yellow dye that medieval families used for clothing and crafts. It's like getting 4 different products that would cost you hundreds of dollars at the store, except this one plant provides all those benefits automatically year after year without any maintenance required. Or consider wormwood, which doesn't just kill weeds through its roots, it also produces natural compounds that preserve stored grains and vegetables, meaning medieval families could keep their harvest fresh for months without refrigeration. These plants weren't just solving one problem, they were solving multiple expensive problems simultaneously while actually saving money and reducing work. Compare that to modern herbicides that cost $40 per application, might give you cancer, kill beneficial insects, contaminate groundwater, and only work temporarily. The medieval approach was like finding money on the ground every single day because each plant replaced multiple expensive products while providing additional benefits that you couldn't buy at any price. But here's where it gets really incredible when you understand what the chemical industry doesn't want you to realize about these natural alternatives. Plants like rue and pennyroyal work exactly like having a personal bodyguard for your garden that never takes a day off and gets stronger with age. These plants release chemical compounds through their roots that create an invisible barrier in the soil that weed seeds literally cannot penetrate or survive in. It's like having an underground force field that automatically kills harmful plants while allowing beneficial ones to thrive without you lifting a finger. Medieval gardeners discovered that a border of rue around their vegetable plots would keep out not just weeds but also harmful insects and small animals that might damage crops. The same plant that was eliminating dandelions and crabgrass was also preventing aphids, cucumber beetles, and rabbits from destroying their food supply. This is like having a security system, pest control service, and landscaping crew all working for you simultaneously without any monthly fees or service calls. Modern pest control companies charge hundreds of dollars for treatments that have to be repeated every few weeks and often make the pest problems worse by killing beneficial insects that naturally control harmful ones. But these medieval plants create balanced ecosystems where beneficial insects are attracted and harmful ones are repelled, solving multiple problems at once while actually improving over time. The chemical companies can't make money from solutions that work permanently, so they've convinced everyone that effective pest and weed control has to be expensive, temporary, and potentially dangerous. Here's what's really going to blow your mind about how these plants work compared to anything you can buy at a garden center today. Costmary doesn't just kill existing weeds, it actually changes the pH and nutrient balance of the soil to make it impossible for most weed species to germinate in the first place. It's like having a soil engineer working underground 24 hours a day to create perfect growing conditions for your vegetables while making the environment toxic to weeds. This one plant essentially provides the same benefits as expensive soil amendments, pre-emergent herbicides and post-emergent weed killers combined, except it does it naturally and permanently rather than temporarily. Medieval herb gardens using costmary borders were famous for producing vegetables that were larger, more flavorful, and more nutritious than crops grown in untreated soil. The same plant that was preventing weeds was also concentrating minerals and improving soil structure in ways that synthetic fertilizers cannot replicate. Modern gardeners spend hundreds of dollars on separate products for soil testing, pH adjustment, fertilization, and weed control, then wonder why their results are inferior to what people achieved centuries ago with just plants. But the agricultural industry makes billions selling you solutions to problems that these traditional plants prevent from occurring in the first place. They profit from keeping you dependent on multiple expensive products when one carefully chosen plant could eliminate the need for all of them. The money trail behind suppressing this knowledge is so obvious once you see it that you'll be angry at yourself for not connecting the dots sooner. Chemical companies make about $40 billion per year selling herbicides that have to be reapplied constantly and often create health problems that generate additional profits for pharmaceutical companies. The same corporations that manufacture glyphosate-based weed killers also own companies that produce cancer treatments and fertility drugs for the health problems their herbicides cause. They sell you the poison, then they sell you the antidote for the poison, then they sell you treatments for the long-term damage the poison caused. It's like a doctor who makes you sick so he can charge you for the cure, except it's happening on a global scale with products that are literally in every hardware store and garden center. These companies spend millions on lobbying and advertising to make sure that university agriculture programs teach chemical dependency instead of traditional sustainable methods that would eliminate the need for their products entirely. They fund studies that ignore traditional techniques and focus only on comparing their new chemicals to their old chemicals, never bothering to test whether plants like feverfew and chamomile work better than synthetic alternatives. The medieval gardeners who developed these techniques didn't have profit motives corrupting their research, they just wanted methods that worked reliably without costing money or creating health risks. But corporations can't patent a plant that reproduces itself, so they made sure this free knowledge disappeared from mainstream education. What's really criminal is how simple and accessible these solutions are once you know what plants to use and where to put them. Medieval gardeners didn't need special training or expensive equipment to create weed-free gardens that produced abundant food for their families. They just needed to understand which plants worked well together and how to arrange them for maximum benefit, knowledge that any 12-year-old could learn in a single growing season. Plants like lavender, Santolina, and Artemisia can be grown from seed for pennies each, yet they provide weed control that's more effective and longer-lasting than herbicides that cost hundreds of times more. The techniques are so straightforward that you could transform a completely weed-infested garden into a productive paradise in just 2 growing seasons using plants that cost less than $20 total. But the chemical industry has spent decades convincing people that effective gardening requires extensive technical knowledge, specialized equipment, and ongoing purchases of expensive products. They've made people afraid to try natural methods by spreading myths that traditional techniques don't work in modern conditions or require too much time and effort. The truth is exactly the opposite. These methods work better in modern conditions because our soil is depleted and stressed from chemical abuse, making it more responsive to plants that naturally restore balance and fertility. If you understand what we're about to cover next, you'll never waste money on synthetic weed killers again because you'll have access to solutions that are cheaper, safer, more effective, and actually improve your garden instead of slowly poisoning it. Here's exactly how the machine works to keep you buying expensive solutions to problems that were solved centuries ago for free. First, they removed traditional plant knowledge from university agriculture programs between 1950 and 1980, the exact same time period when chemical companies were investing billions to create herbicide markets. Then they flooded garden centers and home improvement stores with synthetic products while making sure that the medieval plants like tansy, rue, and wormwood became impossible to find in mainstream nurseries. Next, they convinced gardening magazines and television shows to only feature chemical solutions by paying for advertising that funded the entire industry. After that, they lobbied governments to create regulations that made it illegal for small farmers and gardeners to sell or even give away traditional medicinal and pesticidal plants without expensive licensing. Finally, they trained an entire generation of gardeners to believe that effective weed control requires dangerous chemicals and constant maintenance rather than intelligent plant selection that works automatically. The same companies that create the herbicide dependency also own the research institutions that publish studies claiming natural methods are ineffective or impractical. They sell you the problem disguised as the solution, then they sell you more expensive solutions when the first solution creates bigger problems that require ongoing treatment. It's the perfect business model where customer success means loss of revenue, so they've designed products that create permanent dependency rather than permanent solutions. The numbers behind this systematic erasure of knowledge are absolutely staggering when you see how deliberately it was orchestrated across multiple industries simultaneously. Between 1960 and 1990, over 80% of traditional plant knowledge disappeared from mainstream gardening education while herbicide sales increased by over 2,000% in the same time period. The same 30-year window saw the closure of hundreds of family seed companies that specialized in traditional varieties of plants like Costmary, Pennyroyal, and Artemisia that had natural weed-suppressing properties. Major chemical corporations bought out or bankrupted these smaller companies, then discontinued the plant varieties that competed with their synthetic products. Agricultural extension offices that had recommended companion planting and natural pest control for over a century suddenly switched to promoting chemical-only solutions in their publications and farmer education programs. This wasn't market forces or consumer preference driving these changes, it was deliberate corporate strategy backed by billions in lobbying and advertising designed to eliminate alternatives to expensive synthetic products. They literally bought the entire information system and rewrote it to serve their profit model instead of serving gardeners and farmers. The medieval plants didn't stop working, they just became impossible to learn about through official channels that most people trusted for gardening advice. But here's the really insidious part, they didn't just hide the information, they actively spread misinformation claiming these traditional methods were primitive, unreliable, or even dangerous. The cycle is so perfectly designed that most people never realize they're trapped in it until someone like me shows them what's really happening behind the scenes. They create chemical dependency by convincing you that weeds are enemies that must be killed rather than indicators that can be managed through intelligent plant selection and soil health. Then they sell you herbicides that kill weeds temporarily but also damage soil biology, making your garden more susceptible to worse weed problems next season. When the weeds come back stronger because your soil is damaged, they sell you more powerful chemicals that create even more soil damage and health risks. Meanwhile, the original weed problems get worse every year because you're treating symptoms instead of addressing root causes like soil imbalance and lack of beneficial plant diversity. After a few years of this cycle, your garden becomes completely dependent on chemical inputs just to grow anything at all, because the natural soil ecosystem has been destroyed. This is exactly like a drug dealer who gives you free samples until you're addicted, then charges higher prices for stronger doses that create worse problems requiring even more expensive treatments. The chemical companies aren't trying to solve your weed problems permanently, they're trying to create permanent customers who buy their products every growing season for decades. But the medieval gardeners knew that healthy soil with diverse beneficial plants doesn't have weed problems, it has plant communities that regulate themselves without any external inputs or ongoing maintenance costs. What makes this whole scam even more disgusting is how they've manipulated government agencies and educational institutions to promote their products as necessary for food security and environmental protection. The same companies that manufacture herbicides fund university research programs, agricultural extension services, and environmental organizations that publish studies claiming synthetic chemicals are essential for modern farming. They've convinced government agencies that traditional plant-based pest control methods are too risky or unreliable for commercial agriculture, despite centuries of evidence proving these methods work better and safer than chemicals. Then they use those government endorsements to market their products to home gardeners as scientifically proven and professionally recommended solutions. It's like tobacco companies funding lung cancer research and publishing studies claiming cigarettes are good for your health, except it's happening right now in agriculture and gardening industries. They've created fake scientific consensus by controlling who gets research funding and what studies get published in major journals. Independent researchers who publish studies showing traditional methods work better than chemicals mysteriously lose their funding and have difficulty getting their results published in mainstream publications. Meanwhile, studies that promote chemical dependency get featured in major media outlets and cited by government agencies as proof that synthetic herbicides are necessary. The whole system is rigged to make you believe that expensive, dangerous, temporary solutions are better than free, safe, permanent alternatives that actually improve your garden and health over time. But I want you to understand something important about why I'm sharing this information with you right now. This isn't just about saving money on weed control or avoiding cancer-causing chemicals in your garden, although those are certainly important benefits of switching to medieval plant methods. This is about reclaiming your independence from systems designed to keep you dependent and uninformed about solutions that work better than anything they're selling you. When you understand that 20 specific plants can eliminate weed problems permanently while improving soil health, attracting beneficial insects, and providing food and medicine for your family, you realize that gardening doesn't have to be expensive or complicated or dangerous. You start to question what other traditional knowledge has been deliberately hidden from you and replaced with expensive corporate products that create more problems than they solve. This knowledge makes you more self-sufficient, healthier, and financially independent, which is exactly what they don't want because self-sufficient people don't buy products they don't need. But here's what I really want you to understand about the power you gain when you start using these medieval techniques that have been proven effective for over 1,000 years. If you're ready to break free from the chemical dependency cycle and create a garden that works for you instead of against you, then smash that subscribe button because what I'm about to show you next will completely transform how you think about gardening forever. Hit that notification bell too because this type of information gets buried by algorithms that promote corporate content over traditional knowledge that threatens their profit models. And please share this video with anyone you know who's struggling with expensive weed problems because they deserve to know there are better solutions that cost almost nothing and work better than anything being sold in stores today. Imagine walking into your garden next spring and seeing absolutely zero weeds sprouting anywhere while your vegetables and flowers are thriving in the richest, most fertile soil you've ever seen. This isn't some fantasy future, this is exactly what happens when you implement the medieval plant system that I'm about to give you step by step. Within 60 days of planting these 20 specific plants in the right locations, you'll start seeing dramatic changes in your soil quality and weed populations that will make your neighbors think you hired professional landscapers. By the end of your first growing season, you'll have established a self-maintaining ecosystem that gets more effective every year while requiring less work and zero ongoing expenses. The best part is that these plants don't just eliminate weeds, they transform your entire garden into a productive paradise that provides fresh herbs, natural medicines, beautiful flowers, and pest control that works automatically without any intervention from you. You'll literally save thousands of dollars over the next 5 years while getting better results than anything money can buy because you'll have systems that improve with age instead of breaking down and requiring replacement. But here's exactly how to start implementing this knowledge immediately even if you've never grown anything successfully before and you're starting with the worst weed problems imaginable. Start with the foundation plants that do most of the heavy lifting while being virtually impossible to kill even if you have zero gardening experience. Plant tansy along your garden borders in early spring, spacing them about 4 feet apart because each plant will create a weed-free zone that expands outward as it matures. Add wormwood in the corners and strategic points throughout your garden where you want maximum weed suppression combined with insect control. Establish rue around your vegetable areas where you need protection from both weeds and harmful pests that damage crops. Scatter costmary seeds in areas where you want to prevent grass-type weeds while improving soil fertility for future planting. Plant pennyroyal in low spots where water collects and weeds tend to be most problematic because it thrives in moisture and creates hostile conditions for weed seeds. These 5 plants alone will eliminate about 70% of your weed problems while requiring absolutely no maintenance once they're established. You can get seeds for all of these plants online for less than $20 total, and they'll multiply naturally to cover as much area as you need within 2 growing seasons. The medieval gardeners knew that success came from working with natural systems rather than fighting against them, so these plants actually make gardening easier and more productive rather than adding more work to your schedule. The transformation happens faster than you think possible because these plants work synergistically to create optimal growing conditions while simultaneously making life impossible for weeds and harmful insects. Within 30 days you'll notice fewer new weeds sprouting in areas around your planted tansy and wormwood because their root systems are already releasing natural herbicides into the surrounding soil. By 60 days the established plants will be visibly suppressing weed growth and expanding circles around each plant while your vegetables and flowers show improved health and faster growth rates. After 90 days you'll see dramatic improvements in soil texture and color as beneficial microorganisms multiply in response to the natural compounds these plants release through their roots. By the end of the first season your garden will be producing larger, more flavorful vegetables with significantly fewer pest problems than you've ever experienced before. The second year brings even more dramatic results as the root systems expand deeper and the natural ecosystem becomes fully established and self-regulating. This isn't gradual improvement over many years, this is revolutionary change that becomes visible within the first growing season and continues accelerating for several years as the system matures. Medieval families passed these techniques down through generations because they created abundance and security that lasted for decades with minimal ongoing effort. You're about to rediscover agricultural wisdom that supported entire civilizations using methods that work better today than they did centuries ago because modern soil is actually more responsive to natural restoration techniques. The future you're creating isn't just about having a better garden, you're becoming part of a growing movement of people who refuse to stay dependent on systems designed to extract money from basic human needs like growing food. When you successfully eliminate weed problems using plants that cost pennies while your neighbors spend hundreds on chemicals that make their problems worse, you become living proof that the corporate agriculture model is unnecessary and inferior to traditional methods. You start questioning what other areas of your life have been unnecessarily complicated and monetized when simpler, cheaper, more effective solutions exist that have been deliberately hidden from mainstream awareness. This knowledge makes you more self-sufficient and less controllable by industries that profit from dependence and ignorance about natural alternatives that work better than their products. You become someone who helps other people break free from expensive systems that create problems instead of solving them permanently. Your garden becomes a demonstration site that shows friends and family that abundant food production doesn't require synthetic chemicals, expensive equipment, or complicated techniques that most people can't afford or understand. You're not just growing plants, you're growing independence and proving that traditional knowledge often surpasses modern technology in practical effectiveness and long-term sustainability. The chemical companies want you to believe that effective agriculture requires their products, but you'll have undeniable evidence that the opposite is true. They spend billions trying to make you forget what your great-grandmother knew for free, but now you know exactly why they were so desperate to hide this information from you. You've just discovered something that agricultural corporations hoped you would never learn, and now you understand exactly why 20 medieval plants that are 5 times more effective than expensive herbicides mysteriously disappeared from mainstream gardening knowledge. This isn't coincidence and it isn't progress, it's deliberate suppression of information that threatens billion-dollar industries built on creating permanent dependence rather than permanent solutions. But here's what makes you dangerous to their profit model: you now know that effective weed control doesn't require expensive chemicals, ongoing purchases, or health risks that generate additional profits for pharmaceutical companies. You understand that medieval gardeners achieved better results using sustainable methods that improved over time rather than degrading soil and requiring stronger treatments every season. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell because I'm going to continue exposing traditional knowledge that corporations have spent billions to hide from you, and this information literally saves you money while improving your health and independence every single day you use it. Share this video with everyone you know who's tired of expensive gardening problems that never seem to get permanently solved because they deserve to know that better alternatives exist and always have existed. Like this video if you're ready to stop being a customer of systems designed to keep you dependent and start being someone who knows how to create abundance using wisdom that's been proven effective for over 1,000 years. The medieval gardeners knew secrets that modern agriculture doesn't want you to remember, but now that you know the truth, you'll never look at weeds the same way again because you understand they're just indicators of opportunities that can be transformed into benefits using plants that work for free forever.